Hello. Today we will immerse ourselves in an atmosphere of calm and soft lulling sounds of words. Before we begin, like, subscribe, and write in the comments where you are watching from. I am very interested. When you are ready, dim the lights, turn on some quiet background noise, and let us slowly enter the world of night stories together. In the quiet chamber beyond the gentle arc of an aged wooden door, the air holds a soft, almost inaudible murmur. The texture of time seems embedded in every plank of the floor, every beam overhead, every stave in the rounded barrel that rests against the far wall. It is a space without hurry, where every breath finds its place and settles into a steady rhythm. Here, we begin by noticing the simple weight of the air as it moves in and out, the slight coolness against the skin, the whisper of stillness that surrounds. A line of barrels stands along one side of the room, each one its own quiet sentinel. Their curved sides bear the gentle rings of iron, darkened slightly by the passing seasons. If you lean toward one, you will hear the faintest echo of liquid shifting within, the sound more felt than heard, like soft footsteps crossing a distant hall. Each barrel is numbered only by the slant of its grain, the subtle variations of wood that speak of oak or chestnut, of harvests long ago, and quiet afternoons spent watching them mature. Opposite these, a row of earthenware jugs and bottles sits upon a low shelf. Their surfaces catch the dim light in a hazy glow, revealing shapes that are familiar yet free of detail. The bottles stand tall and slender, or squat and round, with necks just wide enough to receive the slow pour of liquid. The jugs bear the curve of a maker's hand, impressions so slight they might instead be the breath of the clay as it was shaped. Each form holds the promise of a taste, not for the body, but for the mind, a calm unfolding of flavors imagined, never rushed. On a simple workbench nearby lie tools that have known many seasons of use. A curved blade with a handle worn smooth by repetition. A wooden mallet whose head bears the faint pattern of innumerable taps. A cloth rag folded and refolded until its edges have frayed in parallel lines. The blade rests against a gentle curve of grain, its steel dulled by time but still straight, still poised. The mallet seems to whisper of patient tapping, of dozens of quiet strikes that shaped staves and sealed casks. The rag carries a faint scent of oil and dust, a reminder that even tools sleep when their hands rest. Between these objects, the floor is strewn with a scattering of grains, little kernels of barley, each one greyed by the husk that once enveloped it, now spilled across the boards like tiny stones on a path. If one stoops to pick up a grain, one might feel the slight roughness of its surface, its rounded body fitting against the fingertip. The grains pile softly in small drifts, as though they had paused mid-fall, and in the hush, one might imagine the echo of wind across distant fields. At the center of the room, a single lantern hangs by a leather strap from a low beam. Its glass panels are slightly misted, diffusing the light into a pale glow that touches each corner with a gentle hand. The flame within flickers without urgency, swaying ever so slightly when a draught passes through the cracks in the wall. That movement carries no alarm, only a reminder that stillness is never absolute, that even in silence there is a subtle pulse, a living hush that surrounds and cradles. The scent here is faint but comforting, a soft blend of wood smoke and fermented grapes, of dry earth and the promise of maturation. It drifts in layers, each one settling on the next, so that one might close the eyes and simply breathe it in, letting it fill the lungs and trace a path down to the belly, where a sense of calm can unfold in gentle waves. Breathe in slowly, breathe out slowly, Feel the quiet spread. Every surface in this place seems to invite touch. The smooth curvature of barrel wood, the cool smoothness of glass, the coarse weave of a sack hanging from a peg. The sack itself is unassuming. A simple fabric pouch tied at the top, bulging slightly with an unseen weight. It hangs in stillness, suggesting the slow passage of whatever lies within. On the opposite wall, a single bunch of dried grapes echoes its form, each berry shriveled yet full of memory, each one a small capsule of sweetness and time. Here, in this gentle expanse, there is no need for story, only for sensation. No need for characters or conflict, only for the endless unfolding of quiet details. No need for a journey, only for the lingering of awareness in a single place. No need for change, only for the continuous flow of now. So we stay here, under the watchful calm of barrels and bottles, tools and sacks, lantern light and drifting scents, breathing in the silence and breathing out the hush. And as we settle, each moment stretching into the next without end, we feel a soft invitation to let go of thought's busy currents, to drift on the gentle tide of observation, to sink into the soothing monotony of texture and presence. In that surrender, the edges of wakefulness soften, and we glide ever so slowly toward a restful quiet, where the steady pulse of this place becomes our own. As the stillness settles deeper, the lantern's glow takes on a steady, pulsing rhythm in your vision, as though it breathes along with you. Beyond the light's halo, the walls recede into soft obscurity, their rough-hewn timbers fading into a gentle haze of shadow. In that muted expanse, the faint outline of a window emerges, its frame simple, its glass slightly rippled by the craftsman's hand. Though night lies beyond, the pane has a faint shimmer, as if it remembers the last traces of daylight and holds them close, ready to release them again when morning comes. Along the floor near the window, a thin drift of sawdust has gathered, tracing a sinuous line that seems to follow the slow path of something long removed. If you kneel and press a finger into the sawdust, you will feel its softness, almost like powdered linen, giving way beneath your touch, then settling back into place with a faint sigh. The grains of wood are varied in colour, light beige, honey gold, pale amber, so that the trail resembles a muted ribbon meandering across the boards. It beckons with the promise of origin, of earlier labours now concluded and left to rest. A low stool stands just beside the workbench, its legs uneven to the eye, but balanced just so beneath a gentle weight. The seat bears faint impressions, subtle dents and washes of darker wood, where hands or knees have lingered. If you were to sit for a moment, you might notice how the stool shifts very slightly, accommodating your weight before settling again into complete stillness. In that pause, you become aware of the room's complete lack of noise, save for the softest things. The breeze brushing a gap in the boards, the amber flame flickering within its glass, the distant hum of settling rafters. From a peg above the stool hangs a length of braided twine, coiled neatly yet forgivingly, so that its loops overlap in a casual spiral. Its fibres are coarse but not harsh, carrying the faint scent of hemp and memory. The end of the twine is frayed into a small tassel, as if it had once served to tie or suspend some humble object now gone. When you tug the cord gently, it sways in a long, lazy arc before returning to its resting place, echoing the arc of the lantern's light across the ceiling. On a small crate tucked beneath the workbench lie several scraps of parchment, thin sheets of off-white, mottled with age. Some bear the faint impression of ink, blurred lines that suggest a list or a note. but the letters have faded into soft grey smudges, leaving their meaning just beyond reach. Other sheets are blank, their surfaces smooth and cool, awaiting marks that may never come. If you touch one edge, you feel the crisp resistance of paper fibres, the slight give that hints at a supple strength. Picking up the top sheet, you let it fall back to the pile, and it flutters softly before aligning once more. Across the room, the bunch of dried grapes hangs above a small barrel to allow any last droplets of syrup to settle into the wood. Those grapes are dusky violet in hue, each one puckered and textured, as though they bear the very wrinkles of time. They sway in the faintest currents of air, brushing the barrel's lid in a gentle, almost inaudible tap. If you listen closely, you might catch that tap as a distant heartbeat, a reminder that even the driest thing can hold a trace of life's rhythm. Slightly to the right, a thick rope coil rests on the floor, a series of loops wound with deliberate care. The rope's fibres are heavy with dust, its surface is rough beneath your fingertips, and stray strands stick up like tiny whiskers. The coil suggests readiness, as though one might unspool it and bring it into action for a task ever so slow, hauling, binding, supporting. But for now, it lies where it was left, a silent promise of function and order, waiting without impatience. Beyond the coil, a small alcove in the wall holds a stack of flat, round lids, each one designed to fit a particular container. Their wooden faces are sanded smooth. The edges bear notches that align perfectly with the rims they shelter. The lids rest in a neat descending pile, each slightly smaller than the one below, creating a stepped pattern that leads the eye gently upward. The top lid is slightly off-center, as though it had been shifted before settling into place. That imperfection invites a closer look, a leaning forward to observe subtle detail. As your gaze completes its circuit of the chamber, you notice again how every object, barrel, bottle, blade, rag, sack, grape, scrap of parchment, coil of rope, array of lids, shares the same silent accord. None demands attention, none clamors to be first. Instead, they exist in parallel harmony, a quiet symphony of surfaces and textures, shapes and scents. In this space, your focus can shift at will, lingering on one detail before drifting to the next, never forced, always free. With each slow breath, you feel the edges of your awareness broaden, like a pebble dropped into still water, its ripples carrying outward until the initial point of contact is barely remembered. The room itself seems to inhale as you do, the lantern's flame flickering in concert, the grapes swaying, the twine swinging, the sawdust undisturbed except for faint echoes of movement. In that mirrored pattern, you sense the widening of calm, an expansive hush. And so the moment stretches, unbroken, carrying you further into gentle wakefulness that feels almost like rest. There is no narrative winding forward, no destination to anticipate, only the careful, loving attention to the present, the hush of grain against glass, the cool brush of wood against hand, the faint glow of flame making shapes dance in the dark. Each layer of sensation wraps around the next in a slow, interwoven tapestry, inviting you to sink fully into the quiet, to drift deeper, to relax until the steady pulse of this place becomes the pulse of your own calm breathing. And as the steady pulse of this place becomes the pulse of your own calm breathing, you notice how the light softens around the edges of every shape. The lantern's glow, once crisp, now melts into a creamy haze that blurs the line between object and shadow. In this gentle blending, the room feels suspended, as if time itself were pausing to admire its own stillness. Near the center of the floor, a narrow crack runs between two planks, long enough to cradle a single strand of hair. The gap is so slight that its presence might be overlooked, yet it carries a faint draft, a cool, almost imperceptible whisper that stirs the air around it. If you press an ear close, you will hear nothing but the room's soft exhalation, a breath unhurried and complete. The crack reminds you that even the sturdiest forms allow the smallest movements, that rigidity holds its own hidden flexibility. Beyond it, the grain of each floorboard arches in flowing lines, some straight as a path, others curving like gentle waves. You could trace those patterns with your fingertip, following their course from end to end. Slender ridges rising and falling, each telling a story of growth rings and seasons past. The wood's finish is worn to a dull sheen, so that your hand finds equal comfort in its smoothness and in its faint roughness, like the difference between silk and well-worn cotton. Along one wall, the barrels take on a new aspect. The iron hoops have begun to rust lightly, their edges feathered with tiny scales that crumble at your touch, leaving a metallic dust on the palm. That dust is barely noticeable, yet it speaks of change, the gradual yielding of metal to moisture, the endless patience of chemistry at work. In that slow transformation, you sense a certain kinship with your own calm mind, where thoughts drift in and out without forcing direction, shaped by the subtle pressure of attention. A small puddle gathers beneath one barrel, a dark stain on the wood that spreads outward in gentle, concentric rings. It glistens in the lantern's light, a mirror reflecting the soft curve of the ceiling beam. If you dip a fingertip into the pooled liquid, the coolness greets you like a faint memory of early morning mist. Draw your finger away, and a bead will cling to your skin for a moment before falling back into stillness, its descent barely punctuating the hush. Nearby, a collection of metal tools rests on a low shelf, a rasp with fine teeth like the edge of a bird's feather, a small hammer whose head is squared and precise, a slender awl tipped to a sharp point. Each tool lies in perfect alignment, handles parallel, heads resting at even angles. Their surfaces bear the patina of use, a thin layer of oxidation here, a smudge of oil there, suggesting many patient hours spent in quiet labor. Running a fingertip along the rasp's teeth, you feel the delicate resistance beneath your touch, a vibration almost too subtle to register, as if the metal were softly humming. On the opposite wall, a row of hooks holds coils of thin copper wire. The wire loops hang in loose spirals, the coils uneven but balanced in their irregularity. In places, the copper has dulled to a mottled brown, while in others it still gleams like a faint sunrise. If you pull one loop down, it uncoils in a slow arc before settling into a new shape, and in that movement, the light catches the metal in a brief flare, like a tiny spark of warmth in the cool room. Beneath a low window ledge, a simple wooden box rests, its lid slightly ajar. Inside, bits of rope and twine lie coiled like miniature serpents. A scrap of cloth, frayed at the edges, peeks from one corner. The box's interior is mysterious, yet unthreatening, like a small secret offered without ceremony. If you lift the lid further, the hush deepens, as though the room itself leans in to watch your discovery. Then, finding none, releases a sigh of indifference, resuming its quiet vigil. At the far end, where the wall meets the ceiling, the plaster shows gentle ridges, imperfect joins where one patch meets another. The imperfections are so subtle that they register only when closely observed. yet they contribute to the room's lived-in character. Each ridge seems to hold a slight shadow, a hidden crease in the architecture that reminds you nothing is flawless, and that even in peaceful stasis, minor variations lend depth and authenticity. And here, in the midst of these details, you settle more fully. Each whispered breath, each shimmering mote, each curved shaving, each worn tool, each irregular coil, all become threads in a vast tapestry of calm. In that tapestry, there is no thread more urgent than another. None seeks to stand apart. They exist only to support the whole, to contribute their shared silence, their gentle resonance. In that resonance, you find your own quiet center. There is nowhere else to go, nothing else to do. The moment expands until it fills the world you know, and the world outside this chamber feels distant, like the fading echo of a dream. Here, there is only the hush and the hum, the pulse of slow time, and the steady, soothing rhythm of your breath as it weaves through the space, unending and serene. In the gentle hush that follows, you sense how every surface and object in the chamber remains exactly where it should be, as though time itself has paused to admire the tranquility it has created. The lantern's light, fading only slightly, casts a gentle gradient of brightness that falls off slowly, leaving the corners in a soft, comforting twilight. In this calm, you notice that every shadow seems to have its own shape, each one cradling an object in darkness, rather than hiding it from view. On the low workbench, beside the scraps of parchment, a half-empty bowl of water rests. The bowl is simple, its rim a single gentle curve, its interior worn smooth by countless rinses. If you gaze into it, you will see the lantern's flame reflected on the water's slightly rippled surface, the image breaking into soft fragments that drift apart and reunite with each flicker of light. A single droplet, long since fallen from a damp cloth, creates concentric rings that expand slowly, then disappear, as though they were never there. Near the bowl, a bundle of slender reeds is tied together with a strip of leather. The reeds are pale and straight, their tops trimmed at uniform angles, and they rest in quiet readiness against the bench's edge. If you lift one and bend it gently, it yields with a whisper, bending in a long arc before returning to its straight form. That gentle resilience reminds you that flexibility can coexist with strength, and that the softest things often possess the greatest capacity to endure. Between the reeds and the edge of the bench lies a small pile of metal shavings, silver curls as thin as a whisper of smoke. They glisten faintly where the lantern's light touches them, each spiral delicate enough to crush under your fingertip. Yet despite their fragility, the shavings lie in quiet abundance, a testament to the slow, precise work that produced them. In their silent collection, you sense the careful patience of a craftsman who exchanged the rough for the refined, one gentle stroke at a time. From a nail driven into the beam overhead hangs a length of chain, its links broad and flat. The metal is darkened by age, with subtle irregularities that catch the light in muted highlights. The chain drapes in a soft curve, its weight pressing gently downward even as its form arches upward from 2 points of contact. If you lift one end, you feel the steady pull of its mass, and when you let it drop again, it settles with a faint metallic ring that resonates through the quiet chamber. Along the far wall, a thin crack in the plaster forms a line that runs diagonally, like a mark made by a long-forgotten movement. The crack is slight, yet it adds character to the wall's smooth expanse, hinting at the building's living history. Dust gathers in its depths, creating a subtle contrast between pale and dark. If you trace it with your finger, you feel the roughness where the plaster has given way, a reminder that even the strongest forms evolve and adapt over time. At the junction of wall and floor, a tiny cluster of moss has found purchase in a narrow seam. The moss is deep green, nearly black in the dim light, and its velvety surface feels cool beneath your touch. It grows in a compact tuft, each tiny frond reaching outward to gather moisture from the surrounding air. In that humble patch of life, you perceive the quiet persistence of nature, finding space to flourish even in the most unexpected nooks. Beneath the moss, the timber floorboards show a fine network of hairline cracks, like the veins of a leaf pressed into wood. Those cracks widen and narrow in an irregular pattern, suggesting long winters and hot summers that cause the boards to expand and contract. Even here, in the heart of stillness, the slow pulse of seasonal change has left its mark. If you press gently on one board, you will feel it shift just a fraction of an inch before resting again. Across the room, the barrel that holds the dried grapes reveals a subtle detail. A tiny metal spigot near its base, closed now and unused. The spigot's handle is short and squared, its edges worn smooth by turning long ago. If you try to turn it, it resists with a slight stiffness before giving way to a gentle click that echoes softly. Though no liquid flows, the mechanism itself seems to whisper of ceremonies past, of measured drips and close attention. On a small shelf nearby, a collection of bottles sits in descending order of size. The largest is nearly a foot tall, its neck slender and its body bulbous. The smallest is little more than a vial, its glass faintly tinted where the light catches it. Each bottle's surface carries fine scratches, like fingerprints left by affectionate handling. Lifting the smallest, you see how its base is polished to a soft sheen, then let it return to its place so that the array rebalances itself in silent unity. Between the bottles and the workbench, a length of woolen cloth is draped over a barrel's rim. The cloth's threads are thick and loosely woven, with a faint pattern of intersecting lines visible upon close inspection. Running your fingers along the fabric, you feel its coarse weave and note tiny variations in thickness, places where the yarn is slightly thicker or thinner, speaking of the loom's slow rhythm and the weaver's careful hands. High above, the rafters converge in neat angles, their surfaces dark with age but free of cobwebs. At the apex, a small gap allows a sliver of the night sky to peek through, a slender line of inky blue that seems impossibly distant. Through that gap, a single star may be visible, a steady point of light that neither flickers nor pulses, simply exists. In the context of this confined space, that distant star feels like a companion, a reminder of vast stillness beyond these walls. And so, within these measured details, you continue to breathe in harmony with the room. Every surface, every object, every shadow and shimmer merges into a single field of quiet calm. Here, there is no urgency, no need to recall what came before or anticipate what will follow. Only the continuous present, unfolding at the pace of your own relaxed breath. In that ever-deepening stillness, you drift onward, welcomed by the slow unfolding of each moment, carried gently toward deeper rest. Carried gently toward deeper rest, your awareness expands once more to include the simplest elements of the chamber: light, shadow, texture, each one unfolding in deliberate slowness. Ahead of you, the low ceiling slopes downward, its surface marked by the subtle grain of old timbers joined end to end. If you press a fingertip against one beam, you feel the warmth retained from earlier hours, a steady, unhurried heat that seeps into your skin and spreads in a lazy tide across the palm. The beams themselves are arranged in a gentle zigzag pattern, each meeting the next at a slight angle, creating a quiet rhythm overhead. Between them, narrow strips of plaster fill the gaps, their finish speckled with tiny indentations, pinholes left where nails once held laths in place. Those indentations form a faint, random constellation across the expanse of the ceiling, each one a point of subtle relief in an otherwise smooth plane. Below, the floorboards are free of any sharp edges. The builder has sanded them to a degree that allows bare feet to roam without hesitation. You might imagine standing slowly, feeling each board's slight give beneath your weight. The wood creaks ever so delicately at the joints, a soft sigh that reassures you of its lived-in solidity. Each creak is identical in its quiet pitch, as though the floor itself breathes in concert with your inhalations and exhalations. Along one wall, a narrow shelf runs almost the entire length of the room. It is constructed of a single plank, its edges rounded by time and handling. Upon this shelf rest objects chosen with deliberate restraint. A small stone mortar with its pestle, smooth and rounded. A slender brass candlestick, its surface tarnished to a dull gleam. A square wooden box with inlaid design so subtle it appears only when the light strikes it at a precise angle. These objects stand equidistant, leaving gentle gaps that permit the eye to travel evenly from one to the next. If you pick up the mortar, its stone surface feels cool and inert, the pestle's rounded head fitting exactly into the cup's curve. Rolling the pestle in the mortar in a slow circular motion, you hear a faint grinding echo, as though a single grain were turning against another. But even that echo fades quickly, lost in the chamber's overarching hush. The brass candlestick holds a stub of waxy candle that has burned down to a short stump, its wick charred but unlit. The candlestick's base is weighted, so if you move it, it settles without wobbling, as though determined to remain upright. Its vertical shaft bears a series of slight rings, molded into the metal to provide grip, each ring a minor relief that your fingertips can trace in silent succession. The wooden box features an inlay of darker wood that forms an almost imperceptible geometric pattern, triangles so small they blend into a near monolith until you lean in closely. The box's lid lifts with a gentle resistance, revealing an interior lined with faded felt. If you press a fingertip against that lining, you feel the faint embrace of fabric worn thin by contact, soft to the touch, but conveying the sense of years of careful storage. Opposite the shelf, two simple chairs stand side by side, their backs straight and unadorned. The seats are woven from sturdy rush, the fibres crossing in neat over and under patterns. Each strand bears a slight variation in thickness, some plump and rounded, others flattened by wear, but all support the seat evenly. If you press a hand against one chair's seat, you feel the faint give of each woven strand, a collective resilience that holds firm. Between the chairs lies a low table, its surface scratched by countless small marks, each one a minor testimony to things placed and taken, cups set down, tools rested, papers scrawled. Running a fingertip along one scratch, you feel a minute ridge, then a slight depression, then the smooth continuity of the wood. The table's legs taper gently toward the floor, their ends capped with simple metal ferrules that glint faintly where they meet the board. Above the table, a narrow beam supports a single length of rope, tied in a simple loop. The rope's fibers are rough to your touch, each strand composed of countless smaller threads that fray at the ends. If you pull the loop down and release it, the rope swings in a prolonged arc, its motion lazy and unhurried, brushing once against the table's edge before coming to rest. On the table's surface, a small ceramic bowl contains a handful of smooth pebbles, 7 in total, each one shaped by water over centuries, their edges rounded and their surfaces cool. They vary subtly in hue, pale grey, soft cream, dusky taupe. Rolling one between your thumb and forefinger, you feel its gentle heft and note the imperceptible variance in its curvature. Placing it back among its companions, you watch as it nests in a tiny depression in the bowl's centre. As your gaze moves upward, you see faint cobwebs stretching from corner to corner, their silk threads so fine they catch the lantern's light only at certain angles. The webs form irregular nets, each intersection holding a dust mote that glimmers briefly before releasing itself into the air. If you disturb a web with a slow motion of your hand, you scatter its strands and motes in a silent flurry, then pause to watch them drift back into stillness. Beyond these details, the chamber's atmosphere feels charged with a careful balance. Nothing is unnecessary, nothing lacking. Each object, each surface, each slight shift of light and air occupies its place in a choreography of calm. There is nowhere to hurry to, nothing to grasp onto beyond this moment. In the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, you become part of the room's timeless flow, and the boundary between you and this quiet place softens until you rest entirely within its enveloping stillness. In the deepening hush, your attention drifts to the far corner where 2 narrow windows sit, their panes set low in the wall. The glass is slightly wavy, each imperfection bending light into muted ripples. Beyond them, no shapes are visible, only a faint prismatic glow where distant darkness meets the slightest hint of illumination. Resting on the sill of one window lies a thin wooden ruler, its surface marked by barely legible notches. Each notch corresponds to a fraction of an inch, but the numbers beside them have faded into pale scratches. If you align the ruler's edge with the window frame, you sense the precise straightness of its form against the irregular grain of the sill. Beneath this, the wall's plaster shows an area of subtle discoloration, a faint oval where moisture once settled and then evaporated, leaving a shadow of its presence. Touching the plaster, there reveals a slight coolness and a barely perceptible softness, as though the material has grown slightly more porous. The discoloration is pale green at its centre, fading to a light chalky white around its edge, like a memory of water that has long since retreated. Beside the windows, a set of 3 wooden pegs holds a succession of small wooden panels, each painted in a muted tone: pale ochre, dusty rose, and soft sage. The panels are thin and flexible, their painted surfaces scuffed by time, the colours now softened into gentle pastels. If you lift one panel from its peg, you feel the paint's faint texture under your fingertip, the slightest ridge where brush strokes once followed the wood's grain. Replacing it, you hear a soft click as the peg's rounded tip seats itself into the panel's matching hole. Across the floor, a low lantern stand of wrought iron supports a second lantern, unlit and empty of fuel. Its metal framework is simple, composed of vertical bars joined by small rings at the corners. The bars bear a faint patina of rust where moisture has lingered, and here and there a tiny scale of oxidation has flaked away, leaving a rough edge. If you brush your hand gently against the frame, you feel the contrast between cold metal and coarse rust. a reminder of slow transformation. On the wall above the stand, a small round mirror hangs, its glass dull with age. The reflective surface is mottled, dotted with tiny pits where the backing has corroded, allowing faint shadows to emerge in place of clarity. If you peer into the mirror, you see your blurred silhouette encircled by a soft halo of light. Moving your head causes the halo to shift, and the edges of your reflection dissolve into the surrounding haze. Nearby, a cluster of beeswax candles rests on a shallow tray. The candles vary in height and thickness, some stubby, some slender, and their wicks curl at the top like the tendrils of seagrass. The wax itself is pale yellow, and each candle bears streaks of dripped wax that have solidified in delicate ridges down its sides. Touching one candle, you feel the firmness of the wax and note the stray flecks of dust that cling to its surface, as though each candle has waited patiently for its purpose. A short distance away, a folded length of canvas lies on the floor, its edges rough and frayed. The canvas is heavy and coarse to the touch, dotted with tiny flecks of darker wool woven into the natural fibre. If you unfold it slowly, you reveal a rectangular sheet whose surface is free of any pattern or marking, simply blank, awaiting some future use. Letting it fold back into its original shape, you notice how the fabric creases along the same lines it has borne for many days, each fold precise and predictable. Between the canvas and the wall stands a narrow chest of drawers, its wood pale and lightly stained. The chest has 3 drawers, each fitted with a small wooden knob worn smooth by countless turns. Opening the top drawer, you find it contains only a single strip of leather, thin and flexible, with one end tapered to a point. The leather bears no markings, save for a faint impression where it may have once been bound to something else. The drawer's interior is lined with felt that has darkened to a deep grey, its fibres flattened where the leather strip has rested. Opening the second drawer reveals a pile of small metal rings, split rings like those used to hold simple keys or tags. The rings are scattered loosely, some overlapping, some resting individually. Each ring is slightly different in size and thickness, suggesting they have been collected over time. Running a fingertip along one ring, you feel its smooth curve and the barely noticeable seam where the metal was joined. In the bottom drawer, a set of narrow wood shims lies stacked neatly. The shims are wedge-shaped, each one tapered from a thickness of 1/4 inch to almost nothing. Their edges are crisp and their surfaces are smooth, though a few bear tiny chips where they met resistance. If you pick one shim and slide it between the floorboards, you feel it slip into the gap until it wedges firmly, indicating its subtle but essential function in maintaining balance. Above the chest, the wall's surface changes texture, where an older layer of plaster meets a newer patch. The junction is visible only as a faint zigzag line, yet the difference is perceptible beneath your hand. The older plaster is slightly rougher, pitted by years of wear, whereas the newer is smooth and cool. Tracing the line with a fingertip reveals the seam like a secret boundary between past and present. Opposite the chest, the low table from earlier now holds a small pile of softly rolled papers, each tied with a thin ribbon of faded green silk. The papers are blank, their surfaces unwrinkled but aged to a faint ivory. The ribbons, frayed at their edges, carry a subtle sheen where the ribbon's threads remain intact. Untying one, you feel the ribbon slip through your fingers with a quiet rustle, then retie it and allow the loop to rest once more atop the pile. In this stillness, every element continues its silent interplay. The coolness of metal against wood, the contrast of rough and smooth, the faint scent of beeswax mingled with aged plaster and dry timber. Each nuance invites you to remain present, to let the rhythm of careful observation carry you further into the chamber's calm core. And as you attend to these simple details, you find your breathing slowing even more. The spaces between each inhalation and exhalation lengthening into a deep, restful pause. Beyond the chest of drawers, your gaze shifts to the far wall where a narrow ventilation grate rests just above floor level. The metal slats are arranged in parallel rows, each one slightly curved inward at the center, forming a series of gentle arches. The paint on the grate is chipped in places, revealing the pale metal beneath. Leaning close, you hear the faintest rush of air, so soft it almost feels imagined, a cool whisper that draws your attention to the slow exchange between interior and exterior, a silent reminder that this space, though still, is never entirely closed. Beside the grate lies a small pile of cotton cloth squares, neatly folded one upon another. The fabric is soft but worn, each square bearing a faint pattern of frayed threads along the edges. If you lift the top square and unfold it slowly, you feel the smooth give of the fibers as they release the tension of their folds. The cloth is an off-white, warm in tone, with tiny specks of darker yarn woven through. Folding it back into place, you notice how its corners align nearly perfectly, the edges forming a gentle square that mirrors the quiet precision of the grate's pattern. Near these cloths, a single carpenter's pencil rests on the floor, its body worn to a soft grey from handling. The pencil's lead is blunt, its tip flattened by countless markings. Rolling it between your fingers, you feel the slight ridge where the wood meets graphite, and you sense the weight of intention in every line it might have drawn. Setting it down with care, you observe how it points toward the grate, as though inviting you to connect the exchange breath of air with the unseen drafts that carry the room's scent beyond its walls. Above the ventilation, a series of small numbered tags hangs from fine copper wires attached to the wall. The numbers are embossed and painted black. 1, 2, 3, and so forth, each tag dangling at a perfectly equal distance from its neighbor. Their surfaces catch the lantern's light in tiny points of reflection, and if you lean in, you see slight scratches where they have brushed against one another in occasional drafts. The tags suggest order, a quiet cataloguing of elements perhaps long since forgotten, yet their presence adds to the sense of structure that permeates the chamber. Directly beneath the tags, a shallow trough runs along the wall, a channel carved into the floorboards, then capped with a thin strip of metal. The trough is empty now, but its walls are stained with faint residues of past contents, now dry and hardened. Pressing a finger along its edge, you feel the contrast between the cool metal and the warm timber, and you imagine the trough's slow, patient service as it once guided liquids or gathered small items. At the center of the room, a low crate lies on its side, the grain of its wood visible beneath a thin coat of wax. Its slats are spaced evenly, forming narrow gaps that allow light and air to pass through. Inside the crate, a bundle of fine wire brushes rests, their bristles stiff and orderly. Each brush's handle is painted a muted grey, the bristles tinged at the tips where they have been dipped for marking. Removing one, you notice how the bristles fan out slightly, then return to their straight alignment when you tap them gently on the crate's side. Next to the crate, a length of smooth leather tubing lies coiled in a shallow loop. The leather is supple and warm to the touch, its surface stamped with a barely legible maker's mark. Running a fingertip along its curve, You feel the subtle grain of the hide and note how the coil holds its shape without resisting. Uncoiling a small section, you sense a faint scent of tanned hide and age, then allow it to rest again in its coil, satisfied with the memory of its texture. Overhead, the lantern's flame now flickers so subtly that its glow seems constant. The glass panels have collected a thin film of residue, diffusing the light into a soft radiance that washes the walls in muted gold. Shadows retreat to the corners, where objects form gentle silhouettes against the dark. In those silhouettes, you discern the outlines of shelves and beams, barrels and benches, all arranged in a silent geometry that anchors the room's calm atmosphere. On the wall opposite the grate, a pegboard of small wooden pegs forms a grid. Each peg supports a single object, a spool of thread here, a tiny metal spring there, a slender wooden dowel elsewhere. The arrangement is precise, 3 columns wide, 5 rows tall. The items hang with equal spacing, their distances measured and steady. Removing one peg and replacing it in a different hole, you hear the faint rasp of wood on wood. Then note how the grid re-establishes its uniform pattern. Beneath the pegboard, a thin mat of woven rush covers a section of the floor. The rush fibers are pale, interlaced in a pattern that alternates horizontal and vertical strands. Standing on the mat, you feel a slight give beneath your feet, a gentle cushion that contrasts with the firmness of the surrounding boards. Lifting one corner of the mat, you see how its edges are bound with a narrow strip of leather, stitched with thread so fine it is visible only in the lantern's close glow. Alongside the mat, a small, shallow basin carved from soapstone sits quietly. Its surface is cool and mottled, with veins of dark grey weaving through a pale background. A single droplet of water clings to the basin's edge, refracting the lantern's light into a small rainbow arc. Touching the droplet, you feel its coolness before it merges back into the basin's still surface. Each of these details, grate and cloth, pencil and tags, trough and crate, tubing and mat, basin and droplet, carries its own muted presence, adding another layer to the chamber's serene tapestry. As you attend to them, your breathing deepens, your thoughts recede, and you drift once more on the soft current of observation, carried onward by the unbroken hush that pervades this gentle, unassuming space. In the softened light, your eyes settle on the section of wall between 2 sturdy beams, where the finish of plaster gives way to the raw grain of wood beneath. The transition is subtle, a gentle reveal of the building's bones. The wood here has been sanded smooth, its surface pale and unvarnished, with faint parallel lines where the plane's blade passed. If you slide a hand along its length, you feel its cool texture and slight ridges, a reminder of the simple craft that shaped it. Along this length of exposed timber, faint pencil marks remain, small crosses and tiny numerals, each nearly erased by time. They indicate measurements once used to align panels or set beams. Leaning close, you might decipher the number 12 3/4 beside a cross, its faded graphite barely darker than the wood. These marks speak not of finished decoration, but of methodical progress, an invisible hand guiding form into place. Beneath this timber, on the floor, you notice a small collection of smooth seeds, perhaps acorns or some other nut, scattered in a shallow arc. Each seed bears a delicate cap of rougher texture, a tiny hat that shelters a rounded body. The seeds are cool beneath your palm, their surfaces mottled with spots of darker brown. They sit undisturbed, as though placed by someone who paused momentarily, then moved on. In their stillness, they echo the room's hush. Near the seeds, a thin leather strap lays coiled, its length marked by tiny perforations where a buckle once fastened. The leather is supple and aged, its surface bearing creases that trace the strap's bending over many years. If you pick up one end and slowly flex it, you hear a quiet crackle of fibers shifting, a soft testament to the strap's long use and enduring resilience. Across the floorboards, a faint line of white powder draws the eye, chalk dust from some earlier project perhaps. It curves gently around the base of a beam, then fades to nothing where it meets a darker plank. Kneeling, you brush a fingertip along the line, sending a small cloud of dust into the lantern's glow. The particles drift upward, each one catching light like a tiny star, before settling back to form the line once more. To the right, a pair of simple sandals rests by the steps that lead down into the chamber. The sandals are made from braided leather strips, their soles thin but well shaped to a foot's arch. The straps cross over the instep in a symmetric pattern, and small nails secure the soles. Running a hand over them, you feel the smoothness of worn leather and the slight indentations of toe imprints molded over time. The sandals stand ready for use, though no foot approaches. At the foot of the steps lies a coiled rope of finer weave, unlike the thicker rope before. This rope is pale, nearly white, with fibers so fine they gleam softly. The coil is tight, each loop neat and uniform, suggesting careful care in its storage. If you uncoil a length, it feels almost silky, sliding through your fingers with ease, only to be wound again with deliberate precision. On the step's edge, a small pile of chips from a plane's blade collects. A heap of wood curls, some thin and translucent, others broader and feathered. They lie in gentle repose, their curves creating a small sculptural form. Touching one curl, you feel its crispness and note the contrast between its exterior and the inner surface, which is glossy where the blade cut. Beside this pile, a narrow metal chisel rests on its edge. Its blade is beveled to a fine angle, the metal cool and smooth. The handle is wrapped in worn leather, the stitches neat and even. Pressing a fingertip to the blade's face, you feel its precise flatness, while the edges remain unglazed, slightly matte to prevent glare. The chisel lies poised, as though ready for gentle guidance along the wood surface. On the opposite side of the room, you glimpse a series of small indentations in the floor, tiny divots where tools once rested or where small pebbles settled. They form a pattern so faint it takes concentration to trace. A line of 3 near one beam, another pair near the opposite wall. The divots create a rhythm as subtle as breathing, each one a small dip in the wood's surface, an imprint of absence. Under the lantern's glow, the walls reveal their texture in high relief. Undulating bumps where the plaster was applied, slight furrows where trowel passes overlapped. Running your hand over the surface, you feel the alternating peaks and troughs, a tactile map of the wall's creation. Each ridge is soft against your skin, each depression a quiet recess for dust and shadow. Near the center of the room, a cushion of woven straw sits in a shallow depression on the floor. The straw strands are interlaced in a pattern that resembles a spider's web, each intersection tight and secure. The cushion bears the slight imprint of weight, a gentle hollow that suggests someone sat here long ago. If you sit upon it now, the straw yields just enough to cradle your form, offering comfortable support without softness. At your feet, the boards feel warm from the lantern's reflected heat, but just beyond the cushion, they cool to the touch. The temperature gradient is imperceptible unless you pause long enough to notice, yet it underscores the room's subtle variety. Here, warmth and coolness coexist in a quiet balance, just as light and shadow dance without discord. Across from the cushion, a group of metal tacks protrude slightly from a low beam, their heads arranged in a straight line. Each tack is flush with the wood, its head barely above the surface, and their spacing is meticulous. These tacks once held a leather strap or fabric in place. Now removed, they mark where tension once bore down. Each head is darkened by oxidation, its edges softened by the wood's absorption of moisture. Above the tacks, a horizontal beam bears a carved groove, a channel cut to accommodate a sliding panel that no longer rests there. The groove's walls are smooth where the panel moved, and faint streaks of dust mark where the panel's edges brushed. The groove leads to a recess in the adjacent wall, now empty, suggesting a hidden compartment that has long since been cleared. In the hush, these details form a constellation. Wood and metal, leather and stone, light and shadow, all arranged in deliberate quiet. As you attend to each, your breath slows further. Your mind settles into the room's gentle rhythm, and you drift deeper into a space beyond thought, where every slight texture and shape carries you closer to rest. In the gentle glow, your eyes wander back to the low table where the pebbles rested, now noticing a sliver of light dancing between two of them. The beam illuminates a tiny scratch on one pebble's surface, so fine it resembles a hairline crack in porcelain. Leaning in, you sense the pebble's cool weight in your palm, its surface smooth except for that single imperfection, which your fingertip traces in a slow, deliberate line. Beside the table, the woven rush mat shows a new detail, a single strand of rush, frayed at one end, peeking free from the tight weave. You lift the mat's edge to peer underneath, revealing the floor's worn varnish beneath, a slightly darker patch where the mat's shadow has protected the wood from light's fading touch. Replacing the mat, you notice how its presence both conceals and reveals, creating a subtle dance of hidden and seen surfaces. To the left, a small stool stands against the wall, its legs forming a perfect isosceles triangle. The seat's surface bears the faint impression of a round object, perhaps a bowl or a pressed palm, leaving a slight indentation amid the gentle patina. If you press the seat with your own hand, the wood yields scarcely a fraction, then resists, offering firm support in return. Nearby, a slender beam runs diagonally from floor to ceiling, its wood denser and darker than the others. The beam's surface is marred by a few shallow gouges, the deepest of which you follow with your fingertip, noting the way the wood fiber parts and folds back into place. Those marks suggest an earlier tool slipped or an object struck too firmly, yet time has softened their edges so that they now feel as natural as the grain itself. Above this beam, a faint swirl of dust marks the path of an unseen breeze. The swirl outlines a subtle spiral, as if drawn by the room's quiet circulation of air. You might imagine the spiral widening and contracting as the lantern's flame flickers, breathing life into the stillness. On a small shelf beneath the swirl, 3 smooth stones lie in a row, each one slightly different in size and shape. The largest is an oval of smoky quartz, its surface cool and opaque. The middle is a flat disc of limestone, worn thin by water. The smallest is a pebble of pale sandstone, its edges rounded by time. Lifting each one in turn, you feel their differences. The quartz's slight heft, the limestone's fragile thinness, the sandstones balanced middle ground. Next to the stones, a thin strip of brass peeks from beneath a coil of wire. The brass is flat and flexible, its surface dulled by oxidation but free of dents. You slide the wire aside and lift the brass strip, noting its uniform thickness and the way it bends without creasing. Replacing it, you let the wire coil settle back as it was, each loop falling precisely into the next. Below this shelf, the floorboards emit a faint creak under a gentle step. The sound is soft, almost melodic, as though each board sings at a slightly different pitch. You walk slowly, noticing how the creak of one board leads into the next, creating a quiet sequence of tones that fades into the hush. On the opposite wall, 3 small wooden boxes hang by leather straps. Each box's lid has a simple latch, and each latch clicks quietly when opened. You lift the first lid to reveal a cache of slender wooden skewers, thin sticks sharpened at one end. They rest in neat parallel lines, their tips aligned. Closing the lid and moving to the second box, you find a collection of cork stoppers, varying in height and diameter, each one flecked with tiny pores. The third box holds a bundle of blackened wicks, old but intact, bound together by a faded red thread. Beneath these boxes, the wall's plaster shows a subtle bloom of mica, tiny flakes that catch the lantern's glow in a soft sparkle. You brush your finger over the surface and feel the slight grit of the mineral, a hint of something luminous hidden within ordinary wash. At the room's center, the lantern's flame now seems almost suspended, its glow unwavering. In its light, the smallest motes of dust appear like drifting petals, each one spinning gently as they rise and fall. Watching them, you feel the passage of time slow even further, as though the motes mark individual moments rather than drifting in a continuous stream. Nearby, a low stool holds a small wooden mallet, its handle wrapped in a thin band of leather. The mallet's head is squared, with faint grooves where it struck wood so many times that the metal ring holding it in place has scored the handle's end. If you lift the mallet, you feel the balance of its weight, just enough to deliver a soft, controlled tap, yet too heavy to lift in a single relaxed gesture. Replacing it, you watch the stool's legs adjust imperceptibly under the mallet's brief burden before settling back into their long-standing position. Above the stool, 3 lengths of rope hang from simple iron hooks. One is thick and coarse, another slender and smooth, and the third braided from multiple strands into a stiff cord. Their fibers show varying degrees of wear and dust. The thick rope strands have begun to separate at the tips. The slender cord's surface is dusted with a fine grey film. The braided rope's pattern remains crisp, its form unchanged. Plucking each rope in turn, you feel its unique resistance and hear its muted vibration, like a plucked string, before it returns to stillness. To the right, a wooden shelf spans the wall's width. On it rests a series of empty glass jars, each one of a different height and width. Their necks are flared or narrow, their bases round or squared, and their surfaces bear the smallest of imperfections. Tiny bubbles trapped in the glass, faint ripples from the blowing process. Holding one jar, you see how the lantern's glow bends through the curved surface, casting gentle arcs of light on the wall behind. Setting it down, you leave a faint ring of dust where the jar once sat. Underneath the shelf, a coil of thin copper wire hangs from a single nail. The wire loops effortlessly, its surface mottled where oxidation has begun to spread. If you unwind a few feet, the wire curves in gradual arcs, then springs back into loops when you release it. The loose end springs free of the coil, and you note its slight kink where it pressed against the wood. Allowing the coil to settle, you watch the loops tighten, each one nesting neatly within the last. Opposite the shelf, a slender ladder of polished wood leans against the far wall. Its rungs are narrow and evenly spaced, their surfaces worn smooth at the center by countless climbs. The ladder's rails have slight splinters at the edges, tiny rough points that catch a fingertip unless traced with care. Running a hand along one rail, you feel the contrast between the polished center and the slightly rough edge, as though the ladder bears the very imprint of human hands in its finish. At the top of the ladder, a small hatch is set into the ceiling. Its wood matches the beams exactly, blending so seamlessly that one could pass beneath without noticing the panel. A simple iron ring serves as a handle. Pulling the ring causes the hatch to shift open with a soft creak, revealing only pitch darkness beyond. The creak resonates through the chamber like a sigh, then ceases, leaving you in the unwavering hush of the space below. You push the hatch closed again, hearing the latch click into place, and watch as the overlap closes perfectly, leaving no gap to betray its presence. Beneath the ladder's base, a handful of metal washers lies scattered, each one different in diameter, their edges smooth or serrated. You pick up the largest, feeling its slight weight, then let each washer fall back into place within the group, the clatter gentle and fleeting. The washers shift in a small cascade before coming to rest, forming a new pattern of overlapping circles. Along the adjacent wall, a long-handled brush rests against a barrel. The handle is slender, worn to a gentle curve by repeated use, and the bristles are stiff, darkened at the tips by vice dust and residue. Leaning the handle against your palm, you feel its slight give and note the bristles' collective firmness when you press the brush head against the barrel's side. The brush yields a soft whisper of friction before you let it rest once more. On the floor, next to the brush, lies a bundle of twine, tied into a loose knot. The twine's fibers are coarse, and when you loosen the knot, the strands separate smoothly, then tangle again when you let them fall. In that tangle, you see the familiar loops and crossings of haphazard binding, each twist part of a pattern that is both random and orderly. Near the center of the room, you notice a small crack in one barrel's hoop. The iron is split just enough to catch the lantern's light, revealing a tiny sliver of gleam. Tracing the crack with a fingertip, you feel the metal's rough edge and the way oak wood lies just beneath. The crack suggests a long-ago impact or a slow yielding under pressure, yet the barrel stands firm, its contents secure. And as you move again through these quiet elements, barrels and baskets, ladders and hatches, brushes and cracks, you feel the steady rhythm of the room's calm, pressing gently against your mind. Each detail folds into the next, forming a continuous tapestry of observation in which no thread stands apart. Here, in this chamber of hush and stillness, you remain carried onward by the soft undercurrent of detail, drifting gently toward the deepening quiet that awaits beyond conscious thought. In the muted glow that fills every corner, your eyes find a slender bench tucked beneath the ladder, its surface worn smooth by years of gentle contact. The bench is modest, composed of a single plank supported by 4 stout legs. Running a fingertip along the plank's edge, you feel the faint curve where wood has given way to countless palms. The bench's legs splay outward at slight angles, providing perfect stability, and each bears a small, neat notch, perhaps a remnant of marking or measuring, nearly concealed by the grain. Beneath the bench, a narrow trough has collected a fine layer of dust. The dust is pale, almost silvery in the lantern's glow, and when disturbed by a fingertip, it drifts upward in slow, languid spirals before settling back to the floor. Within the trough lies a single nail, its head darkened by oxidation and its shaft tipped with a hint of rust. If you lift the nail, you feel its weight, light yet solid, and you note the slight irregularities in the metal where it was cast or hammered into place. Replacing it, you watch it nestle among the dust, vanishing almost entirely beneath the fine powder. Above the bench, the ladder's rails extend to meet the ceiling beam, where their ends are encased in small leather pads. The pads are soft but firm, shaped to cushion the contact between wood and wood. Pressing a finger into one, you feel its pliant surface give way under gentle pressure, then return to its original form the moment you remove your hand. Those pads speak of care, a subtle attentiveness that preserves the integrity of both ladder and beam. Alongside the ladder, the wall reveals a series of tiny screw holes, now empty and dark within. The holes form a faint vertical line, equally spaced, as though a narrow board or slat was once affixed there. Their presence is almost imperceptible until you lean close and sense the slight cavities beneath your gaze. The wall's surface surrounding them is marked by faint discoloration, areas slightly lighter or darker, tracing the path of the missing element. Near these holes, a small wooden plane rests on a narrow ledge, its sole polished smooth and its blade honed to a whisper-thin edge. The plane's body is stained with old shavings that have darkened the wood where they fell, leaving delicate patterns of grain beneath. If you hold the plane and tilt it to catch the lantern's light, you see how the blade sits flush, its bevel catching faint glints before slipping back into the body's shadow. Beneath the plane, a folded piece of sandpaper lies quietly. Its surface is mottled, the abrasive grit worn in places and fresh in others. Touching the paper's rough side, you feel areas where the grit has worn away, creating smooth patches that contrast with the remaining texture. The paper carries a faint scent of resin and wood, a quiet reminder of surfaces smoothed and shaped. Further along the wall, a cluster of small metal brads is stuck into a wooden panel, the heads forming a loose diagonal line. Each brad's head is domed and tiny, the metal still bright where it peeks through the dust. Pressing one slightly, you feel the resistance of the wood beneath and the steady anchoring that holds it firm. These brads suggest past attachments, perhaps fabric lining or light trim, now removed to leave only these subtle signposts of absence. On the opposite side of the bench, the second lantern stands unlit on the floor. Its glass panels are cracked in one corner, yet the framework of wrought iron remains rigid and intact. The cracked glass catches the light in a fractured pattern, casting tiny shards of brightness that dance across the nearby wall. Touching the lantern's frame, you feel the cool metal and note the slight roughness where corrosion has begun. Nearby, a bundle of thin dowels leans against the bench's leg. The dowels are uniform in diameter, but vary slightly in length. Their ends are cut cleanly at right angles. They are pale, nearly matching the bench's worn surface. If you pick up a dowel and tap it gently on the floor, you hear a muted thump that resonates briefly before dissipating into the room's stillness. Between the bench and the ladder, the floorboards reveal a subtle shift in color. One board is slightly darker, as though it were replaced at a different time. The seam between it and its neighbor is smooth, sanded until barely noticeable. Yet beneath a layer of fine dust, the seam's presence is palpable, a faint line that guides the eye in a gentle, winding path. Above this seam, the beam supporting the ceiling shows a faint carving of parallel lines, likely the marks of a tool used to plane or shape another piece of wood. The lines run in perfect unison, each stroke echoing the one before. Tracing them with your fingertip, you feel the slight relief of each groove, a textured map of careful, repetitive motion. Under the bench's right leg, a small scrap of cloth peeks out, frayed and dusty. The cloth is woolen, its fibres tangled and matted, with a faint stripe of darker wool running its length. Pulling it free reveals a patch of floorboard beneath, its varnish dulled but free of dust. Replacing the scrap, you see how it conceals just enough to intrigue, yet allows glimpses of the floor's worn pattern. And here, in these intertwined details of bench, ladder, plane, lantern, dowel and dust, you continue your unhurried journey. Each surface and object invites gentle attention, each nuance extending the chamber's hush. In this extended stillness, the rhythms of wood and metal, light and shadow, converge into one seamless flow. Your breath steadies, matching the slow pulse of the room, and you feel carried onward in the unwavering current of calm. And carried onward by the unwavering current of calm, your attention drifts once more to a section of floor unvisited until now. The area beside the slender dowels, where the boards meet at a slight angle. The grain here is particularly pronounced, the lines of growth, rings forming gentle arcs that converge toward a knot near the wall. That knot, dark and oval, bears a tiny fissure splitting its center, as though the wood itself exhaled in relief when the tree grew free of its confines. Leaning close, you can feel the subtle change in texture around the knot, a faint ridge that your fingertip can follow like a slow winding path. Beyond this, at the base of the wall, a low panel of molded wood stands slightly proud of its neighbors, its surface carved with a shallow groove that runs horizontally. The groove is so slight that it might be mistaken for a scratch, yet it continues without interruption for the panel's full length. If you press a nail's head into the groove, you feel the exact width of the channel, and if you slide it along, you hear a faint rasp as metal meets aged wood. Releasing the nail, you watch it settle back into place on the floor, leaving the groove undisturbed. Above the panel, the plaster veers into a gentle curve, bulging outward ever so slightly before retreating again. This imperfection catches the lantern's glow in a soft crescent, creating a shadow that seems to move as the flame flickers. Resting your palm against the bulge, you sense the plaster's firm resistance, yet beneath it you feel a delicate warmth carried from the room's center. The wall here feels almost alive, as though it breathes in concert with your own inhalations. Nearby, a collection of small ceramic insulators sits on a narrow ledge, each one shaped like a tiny spool, their surfaces glazed in muted creams and greys. The insulators are cool to the touch and free of chips, their rings perfectly formed to cradle slender wires. If you line them up, you notice that each height differs by a mere fraction of an inch, creating a subtle staircase of form. When you touch one end of the row, a minuscule vibration runs through the grouping, as though the smallest tremor of your hand traveled through each ceramic body in turn. Across the room, a coarse woolen blanket drapes over a low rack. The blanket's fibers are thick and softly matted, its pattern a simple grid of darker and lighter threads. Running your fingers along the weave, you feel the slight variations in fiber tension. areas where the yarn was pulled tighter, areas where it relaxed more freely. Folding the blanket over the rack's top beam, you sense its weight settling, its edges falling in gentle folds that echo the rhythm of gravity itself. Underneath the rack, a scattering of short wooden pegs lies on the floor, each one tapered at one end to allow for insertion into unseen holes. The pegs are smooth, their surfaces unvarnished, bearing tiny lines where they met the interior of a board. If you pick up each in turn, you feel differences in diameter and length, some thick and stubby, others slender and elongated, yet all share the same quiet purpose of fitting precisely into place. Beside the pegs, a shard of broken pottery rests, a fragment of curved rim, its glaze a soft moss green that has dulled to matte. The shard's broken edge is unexpectedly smooth, rounded by many small movements against surrounding materials. Touching the interior side, you note the subtle color change from clay to glaze and the slight waviness of the ceramic surface where the glaze pooled during firing. Setting the shard down, you watch its shadow shift as the lantern's flame sways. High above, in the beam that spans the room's width, you see a long row of tiny nail holes, hundreds of them in near-perfect alignment. Each hole once held a slender nail that kept the beam flush against the laths above. Tracing their pattern with your gaze, you feel the slow passage of time, imagining the countless nails hammered and withdrawn, each leaving its gentle imprint. The beam's surface is studded with these faint voids, a star field of absence against solid wood. Turning toward the opposite wall, your eyes find a narrow gap where two boards do not quite meet. The gap is scarcely more than a fraction of an inch wide, yet through it you glimpse a sliver of darkness, an unlit space waiting beyond. If you press a thin strip of paper into the gap, you feel the resistance of opposing edges, the slight friction of boards aged by repeated shifts. When you withdraw the paper, it emerges creased and delicate, bearing the imprint of both surfaces it encountered. Near this gap, a small clump of dried moss has adhered to the wall's baseboard, its fibrous mass soft and faintly pliable. Each strand curls inward, forming a miniature dome that seems to cradle hidden moisture. Touching it gently, you feel the brittle give of desiccated life, and you sense the living persistence that lingered here before the chamber's stillness absorbed it all. On the floor beneath, a set of 3 concentric circles of dust forms a pattern, as if some round object once rested here for ages. The circles are shallow depressions in the otherwise flat layer of dust, their edges raised slightly by displaced particles. Running a finger along one ring, you feel the fine granules shift and reform, leaving a temporary indent that soon refills as motes drift back into place. Behind you, the low bench's underside reveals a small wooden tag tied to one of its support beams. The tag is slender, its corners rounded and its edges worn smooth. Inscribed in faint script are the numbers 7 to 12, suggesting a range or a grouping, though what it refers to remains a subtle mystery. Touching the tag's surface, you feel the irregular grooves of each character, carved lightly as though by a delicate tool. Nearby, a thin ribbon of metal, perhaps lead or tin, lies coiled where it fell from a shelf above. The metal is soft and malleable, its surface slightly tarnished. Picking up one end, you flex it and hear a faint creak as the metal yields, then springs back with a soft resilience. Replacing the ribbon, you watch how it uncoils to a gentle arc before settling back into its coil, reaffirming its form without complaint. At the room's far end, an unlit lantern stands on a neatly stacked pile of crates. The lantern's glass panels are intact but cloudy, their surfaces streaked by age. Inside, a wick lies curled at the bottom, its tip blackened as though by a flame long extinguished. If you peer through the glass, you see your reflection in soft focus, surrounded by the ghostly outlines of the chamber's contents. And in this continuous dance of grain and groove, of dust and shadow, of hidden gaps and revealed details, you find yourself enveloped in an infinite now. Your breath, the lantern's glow, the room's silent accord, all merge into one seamless texture of calm. In that texture, thought becomes unnecessary, and you drift further into the gentle embrace of unbroken stillness. And within that infinite now, your gaze drifts once more, absorbing the chamber's quiet architecture, as if you were rediscovering each detail anew. Directly beneath the unlit lantern, the floorboards bear a faint circular pattern of discoloration. The rings are subtle, 3 in number, spaced almost imperceptibly apart, remnants of a vessel that once sat here. Leaning down, you trace the outermost ring with a fingertip, feeling the slight difference in texture where wood fibers have darkened and settled. Then draw your hand back to observe the concentric shadows that linger even in the lantern's dim glow. Along the adjacent wall, a patch of plaster is studded with tiny pinpricks, perhaps the vestiges of a forgotten pegboard, where nails once held lightweight tools. Each pinhole is filled now with a dust mote, creating a delicate stippling that catches the light like distant stars. If you bend close and gently blow across the surface, you dislodge a few motes into the air. They drift lazily upward, then settle back, restoring the mottled pattern as though nothing had changed. Opposite, the ladder's shadow arcs gracefully across the wall, painting slender bars of darkness that shift with the lantern's flicker. Where a rung meets the beam, you notice a small notch carved into the wood, just large enough to cradle the ladder's rung when it rests in its notch. The curve of the cut is smooth, its edges softened by repeated contact, suggesting that the ladder was once repositioned carefully, rung by rung, until it nestled precisely in place. Nearby, a low barrel rests on a trio of small wooden blocks, raising it slightly above the boards. The barrel's stave shows a fine network of hairline checks, tiny cracks that radiate outward like the veins of a leaf dried in sunlight. Running your hand along one stave, you feel these micro-fractures as slight undulations beneath your palm, and you sense the slow, weathered breath of the oak, giving and adapting as it ages. On the floor beside the barrel, a scattering of fine metal filings glitters faintly. The shavings are so small they resemble dark pollen grains, and when moved they shift like quicksilver, pooling into tiny heaps. Touching one heap with your fingertip, you feel a slight magnetism, if only imagined, before the particles disperse, redirected by the tiniest disturbance, then reassemble almost instantly in new configurations. Above the barrel, a hunk of dried clay adheres to the beam in a crumbling patch. Its surface is fissured, and if you press a nail gently against it, you feel the brittle give of the material before a small fragment breaks away. That fragment disintegrates under your fingertip into an almost impalpable dust, which drifts down to rest on the barrel head and floor below. In the hush, the clay's crumble seems magnified, its tiny collapse echoing through the still air. Between this barrel and its neighbor, a length of wax twine is draped, a single thread stretched in a gentle arc and pinned at each end by small wooden pegs. The twine's wax coating gives it a faint sheen, and if you slide your finger along its surface, you feel the smooth resistance of wax over fiber. The string hangs without sagging, held taut by the pegs. and its straight line guides your eye along the room's silent geometry. On a low shelf behind the barrels, a row of glass vials stands in a neat procession. Each vial is sealed with a cork stopper, and within each, a different residue glimmers. Fine sand, wood ash, powdered chalk, tiny beads of resin, and an assortment of minute stones. When you tilt one vial, its contents shift in a slow, whispering slide, then settle again with a subdued sigh. Returning it to its place, you watch as the residues realign, each layer distinct yet subtly connected by the shared translucence of glass. Below these vials, the shelf's underside reveals a shallow groove, worn by a cord or strap that once looped through it. The wood there is polished smooth, worn by friction into a gentle channel. If you run a nail's head along the groove, you feel the metal sliding softly against aged timber, a muted whisper of motion. Across the chamber, the horseshoe-shaped workbench curves gently against the wall, its surface mottled with past stains, spilled liquids that have seeped into wood grain and left pale halos. In one stained center, a dark spot marks where a droplet lingered longest. Pressing a fingertip there, the surface feels slightly rougher, as though the wood has scarred itself to remember the drop that altered its hue. Resting on the workbench, a shallow bowl of unglazed clay holds a few smooth river stones. Their surfaces are matte, where they have lost the polish of water, and in places, the porous stone has caught tiny flecks of dust. Rolling a stone slowly in the bowl, you hear soft thumps as it meets the clay's edge, each impact echoing the past collision of water and rock in a riverbed. Near the bench's lip, a small metal gauge lies flat, a semicircular arc with engraved lines marking increments. The gauge's surface bears tiny oxidation spots, and when held to the lantern's light, the engraved lines catch a faint shimmer. Tracing the arc with your fingertip, you feel the slight depth of each marking, precise and deliberate, as though each line counted a measured degree of curvature. At the chamber's far corner, a pile of coarse sand has gathered in a shallow trough, perhaps the remnant of an abandoned experiment. The sand is pale and fine, each grain nearly identical to its neighbor. If you tilt the trough gently, a minor landslide forms in miniature, the grains cascading in an even flow before settling back into a flat plain. Above the trough, a length of rope is looped around a beam in a half-hitch knot. The rope's fibers are stiff with dust, and in places the strands are worn thin by the knot's tightness. Running your hand along the rope, you feel the transition from rough, frayed edges to smooth, less touched midsection, and you sense the quiet tension of the knot's embrace. Turning back to the room's center, you notice how the shadows align to form a loose circle around the lantern's glow, as though drawn by an unseen compass. Each object, barrel, bench, bowl, gauge, vials, trough, occupies a point on this circle, their silent forms united by the light's gentle pull. In that circle, you stand at the precise center, embraced by calm's perfect orbit. And so, within these soft delineations of shape and texture, you breathe deeply, each inhalation gathering the chamber's collective hush, each exhalation releasing you further into stillness. In that steady rhythm, the lantern's flame and your own breath merge into one perpetual flicker, carrying you silently onward, deeper into the boundless serenity of this timeless space. And as you remain at the chamber's gentle center, the full circle of objects around you dissolves into an ambient harmony. Your gaze drifts upward to the ceiling where the beams converge in a lattice of wood. Each beam is marked by minute nail scars, tiny dimples where fasteners once held laths or panels. The scars form an irregular grid that invites your hand to trace from one to the next, each indentation as small as a fingertip's width, each one carrying the silent memory of construction. Above you, a thin wisp of cobweb stretches between two beams, its strands so fine they shimmer only when the lantern's glow catches them at the right angle. The web holds a single dust mote at its center, which vibrates imperceptibly whenever a breath stirs the air. Watching that mote hang suspended, you feel the room's stillness deepen, each filament a thread in this vast spider's tapestry of calm. Turning back to the floor, you notice a faint oval discoloration where a puddle once gathered and evaporated. The stain's edges are frayed like watercolor on paper, and within the oval, the wood grain seems more pronounced, as if the moisture raised the fibers. Leaning down, you press a fingertip into the wood's surface. It yields the slightest under your touch, then springs back as though recalling a once soft cushion. Along the wall near the stain, a narrow strip of moulding runs horizontally, its profile simple and unadorned. The moulding's paint is chipped at regular intervals, revealing the pale wood beneath in slender lines. If you draw a fingernail along the moulding, it emits a faint rasp, the sound so soft it blends almost seamlessly with the chamber's hush. Behind you, the low crate that held wire brushes now appears in a new light. Its slatted sides are etched with a fine network of hairline cracks, each one following the grain's direction. If you slide your palm across the crate's top, you feel these cracks as a barely perceptible texture, like veins on the surface of an aged leaf. Beside the crate, a rolled canvas tube rests against the wall. The tube's seams are stitched with thick thread, each stitch forming a tiny loop that protrudes slightly from the fabric's surface. When you pinch one stitch between your fingers, you sense the tension in each loop, as though the tube holds something within that pressures its seam from the inside. Below the canvas, the floorboards show a pattern of alternating light and dark planks. The contrast is subtle. One plank tinted by years of shadow, the next by direct lamplight. Walking across them, your footsteps produce a gentle cadence, soft creaks that rise and fall like a muffled heartbeat. Nearby, a shallow iron grate lies flat on the floor, its metal bars spaced wide enough to glimpse the darkness beneath. The grate's surface is cool and slightly pitted, where rust has begun to flower in tiny specks. Running a fingertip across one bar, you feel the mottled texture of metal yielding to oxidation, and you note how the bar's edges have rounded over time. To the left of the grate, a small alabaster bowl holds a fine, pale powder, perhaps lime or finely ground clay. The powder rests in a perfect dome within the bowl's curves. Dipping a fingertip into the powder, you feel its softness, like chalk dust, and when you withdraw your finger, the bowl's surface shows a crater whose edges crumble inward, slowly erasing your trace. Above the bowl, the wall's plaster reveals a tiny network of spiderweb cracks, hairline fractures that spread outward in random directions like frost on glass. Each crack is no wider than a hair, yet together they form an intricate map of imperfection, reminding you that calm need not be flawless to be complete. Across the room, where the barred window sits high on the wall, you notice a slender shard of light falling into a beam. The light's edge is razor sharp, cutting across the dust-laden air in a straight line. In that shaft of light, motes drift in slow motion, each one catching the beam before floating out of it, like tiny fireflies moving through a dusk sky. Beneath the window, a low wooden stool supports a tarnished tin cup. The cup's rim bears a slight dent, and its interior shows concentric rings of mineral deposit from repeated use. If you tilt the cup toward the lantern, you see the light sparkle off the deposit's crystalline edges before vanishing into shadow. Next to the stool lies a coil of fine brass wire, its loops so tight they gleam like woven sunlight. Pulling out a few inches, you feel the wire's springiness as it resists your motion, then recoils into loose spirals when released. Touching the wire's surface, you feel the cool solidity of metal tempered by the warmth of your skin. In the far corner, a battered drinking gourd rests on a low shelf. Its surface is worn smooth where hands have held it, and its opening bears the slight brim of lipware. Running a fingertip around the gourd's mouth, you feel the contrast between its polished rim and the rougher body, whose carved pattern has been worn nearly flat by time. Beneath the shelf, a small cluster of pebble-sized beads has spilled from a broken string. The beads are made of polished bone, each one shaped into a tiny disc with a central hole. Picking up one, you feel its cool hardness and note the faint ridges where a lathe once spun it into shape. Releasing the bead, you let it roll across the wood, where it comes to rest amid its companions in a new arrangement. And so, in this ever-evolving survey of shapes and textures, you continue to drift. Each subtle alteration in light, each new imperfection revealed or concealed, draws your awareness deeper into the chamber's serene fold. Here, there is no haste, only the infinite examination of being, moment by moment, breath by breath. Each detail a soft landing on the path to deeper rest. Your awareness, carried on the lantern's amber glow, drifts now to a corner where two low crates stand one atop the other. The bottom crate's planks are spaced slightly wider than the top, and between them, a faint sliver of dark floor is visible. The wood is seasoned and cool to the touch. Running a fingertip along a gap reveals the thickness of each plank and the slight bevel worn smooth over time. The upper crate is bound by a slender metal strap, its iron darkened and mottled with age. Pressing lightly against the strap, you feel its restrained firmness, a gentle holding force against the wood's subtle expansion. Atop the upper crate rests a small wooden chest with a simple iron latch. The chest's lid bears gouges, thin parallel ridges that trace the grain's direction, likely the result of opening and closing over countless evenings. Lifting the latch produces a soft click that resonates briefly, then dies away into the chamber's hush. Inside, shredded bits of straw nestle in the corners, the fibres pale gold and brittle. A single metal thimble lies nestled in the centre, its surface pitted but still shining faintly where a seam once held its shape. Nearby, a length of fabric drapes across the corner of the lower crate. The fabric is coarse linen, its weave pattern pronounced and uniform. Its edges are hemmed with mismatched thread, some stitches tight, others looser, suggesting a hurried repair at some past moment. Running your hand along the linen, you feel the variation in thread tension, the subtle bumps of individual fibres, and the soft patina of wear where hands have smoothed the surface. On the floor, just beyond the crates, a small pile of wooden shims lies in a fan. Each shim tapers from thick to thin, and their ends are staggered so that the collection forms a miniature staircase. Picking up the top shim, you feel its crisp edge and note the way the wood's grain runs lengthwise, giving it both flexibility and strength. Replacing it, you watch how the other shims shift slightly, settling into a new pattern before resting. Along the adjacent wall, a narrow shelf supports a row of dark ceramic jars. Their shapes are simple, rounded shoulders, slender necks. but each jar's glaze differs subtly. One is matte black, another deep charcoal with a faint sheen, another mottled in shades of slate and ash. Touching the surface of each, you feel the coolness of clay tempered by fire, and the faint telltale pockmarks where small air bubbles burst during firing. Each jar bears no label, yet their ordered presence implies a silent cataloguing of unknown contents. Beneath the jars, the shelf's underside reveals a slender channel where water droplets once collected and dripped in measured cadence. The channel's wood is stained darker than the surrounding plank, and you sense its past purpose as you run a nail's head along its length, hearing the metal's soft rasp against worn timber. A few feet away, a small pile of nails lies scattered on the floor, their heads catching the lantern's glow like miniature moons. Some are straight, others slightly bent, some long, some short. Gathering them into a neat row, you notice the variation in head diameter and shank thickness, as though each served a different function. Rolling one nail between finger and thumb, you feel the contrast between cool metal and the warmth of your skin, then let it rest against its companion. Above this scene, a length of chain hangs from a hook in the beam. The chain's links are uniform, but where each connects, a tiny imperfection appears, an uneven weld, a small nick, a slight warp. These irregularities catch the lantern's light in tiny flashes as the chain sways ever so slightly. If you lift the end and let it drop, the links settle with a muted clink before silence resumes. Across the room, your gaze finds an area of floor where the planks are interlocked in a chevron pattern. These boards are slightly newer than those around them, their surfaces smoother and more closely joined. They bear no dust, as though periodically scrubbed or polished, and their lighter tone suggests different timber. Stepping onto this patch, you feel a firm assurance beneath your feet, an intentional contrast to the older, more forgiving floor elsewhere. Resting on one of the chevron planks is a small brass bell, its handle slender and curved. The bell's body is smooth, except for a single band of engraved dots circling its waist. Running a finger over the dots, you feel their precise spacing and the way the metal's warmth transfers instantly. Lifting the bell and giving it a gentle shake, you hear a soft chime, clear yet subdued, that lingers for only a moment before dissolving into the room's quiet. Near the bell, a short length of leather thong lies coiled. The thong is supple, its edges beveled and slightly darkened by handling. Running your fingertips along its surface, you feel both its smoothness and the fine grain of hide. Uncoiling it, the thong straightens into a gentle arc, then returns to its loose coil when released. On the opposite wall, a pegboard holds an assortment of hand tools, a small file with fine teeth, a stubby hammer, a pair of pincers with narrow jaws. Each tool is hung by a thin leather loop, and their handles show varying degrees of wear. Some darkened and polished by handling, others still rough from original manufacture. Grasping the file, you feel its weight and balance, then replace it, noting how the tools together form a silent chorus of readiness. Beneath the pegboard, a faded rug lies flat on the floor. The rug's pattern is a simple grid of muted colours, dusty rose, dove grey, pale cream. But time has softened them into an indistinct wash. The fibres are short and tightly woven, creating a firm surface that resists matting. Stepping onto the rug, you feel its slight spring, the give of each tuft beneath your weight, and you notice how your footsteps are muffled to a soft thud. In the corner beyond the rug, a small wooden step stool rests on its side. The stool's top is marked by a worn circle where a pot or vessel once sat. Its legs are tapered, and one bears a faint scratch that runs diagonally, a mark left perhaps by the stool's movement across a plank. Righting the stool, you feel how its weight shifts. The metal ferrules on the leg ends barely grazing the floor as you set it upright. Finally, your attention returns to the lantern circle of warm light. The edges flicker between brilliance and shadow, drawing your eyes in and out, like the inhale and exhale of the room itself. Within that circle, every object you have encountered, crates and chests, nails and bells, jars and rugs, exists in serene company, each detail a step on an unending path of quiet contemplation. And as you stand at this juncture, breathing in harmony with the amber pulse, you feel the chamber's calm embrace carrying you onward toward the gentle threshold of rest. As you remain within the circle of lantern light and shadow, your senses shift to the far corner where the chamber's floor meets the base of the wall in a gentle, right-angled seam. There, a thin sliver of dust has gathered in a narrow channel carved into the wood, perhaps once intended to guide moisture or to conceal wiring. The channel's edges are worn smooth by the occasional sweep of a broom or the drift of motes settling into place. Running a fingertip along one side, you feel the polished softness of wood relieved by the slight depression, and you notice how the dust shifts beneath your touch, only to refill as the air stills. A short distance above, the plastered wall shows a faint bloom of mineral residue, a pale patch shaped like an irregular teardrop. Its surface is slightly rougher than the surrounding smooth plaster, and if you press gently, you feel the granular texture of crystallized salts. The residue's color varies from chalky white at the edges to a faint blush of pink at its center, as though a blush of warmth once lingered there. Stepping back, you see how the lantern's glow turns the blush into a muted halo that seems to pulse faintly as the flame sways. Near this patch, a small wooden bracket projects from the wall at waist height. Its form is simple, a right-angled block with a narrow ledge atop. But its surface bears the marks of utilitarian use, a series of faint scratches and a shallow groove worn by an object repeatedly placed and removed. If you lift your hand to the bracket's ledge, you find it balanced perfectly under the weight of a small, unassuming clay cup that sits there now, its rim chipped in one spot. The cup's exterior is matte, its pale grey body interrupted only by the slight band where glaze transitions to unglazed clay. Holding the cup, you feel the coolness of its walls and the reassuring solidity of its form before setting it back in its cradle. Beneath the bracket, the floorboards bear a series of faint impressions. A row of indentations about the size of a fingertip, spaced at regular intervals. They create a subtle rhythm along the floor as though someone once tapped their fingers in a quiet count. Touching one indentation, you feel the slight hollow beneath your fingertip, and you trace the line of marks with gentle curiosity, imagining the deliberate cadence that formed them. Alongside these marks lies a narrow coil of fine steel wire, wound into a tight spiral and left on the floor as though casually discarded. The wire's surface carries a slight sheen where oxidation has yet to dull it, and if you lift one end, the coil unwinds in a slow arc before recoiling with measured precision. The wire's loops catch the light in tiny flashes as they move, and when you release the coil, it settles into a new, imperfect circle that hints at human touch. Above the coil, a broom rests against the wall. Its handle is long and slender, worn smooth to a gentle taper toward the bristles. The bristles themselves are dark and stiff, bound by a tight band of leather. Pressing the brush gently against the floor, you feel the firm resistance of the bristles and the flex of their tips as they bend slightly under pressure, then spring back into place when released. Setting the broom aside, you notice how its shadow stretches in the lantern light, forming delicate lines across the boards. To the left, a low bench holds a folded piece of canvas. The canvas is heavy, its fibres coarse, and the fold has left a pronounced crease. Picking up the fabric, you feel its weight and the subtle resistance of its material. Unfolding it, you reveal a length of cloth free of markings or stains, an open space a possibility. The canvas drapes easily, its edges falling straight before you refold it, allowing the crease to reassert itself with quiet certainty. Across the room, the round iron ring embedded in the wall for attaching a tether shows signs of repeated use. The ring's surface is polished smooth by countless loops of rope, and the metal's coolness contrasts with the warmth of your palm as you turn it slowly. You note the fine grooves where strands of fibre have rubbed the iron, and you feel the satisfying weight of the ring as you let it fall back into its recess. Beneath the ring, the baseboard meets a short length of copper pipe that runs horizontally before disappearing behind a barrel. The pipe's surface is dulled by patina, yet in places its original reddish sheen peeks through. Tracing its length, you feel the slight warmth conducted from the nearby lantern and the gentle texture of metal aged by air and touch. Near the pipe's end, a valve handle lies on the floor. A small wheel of cast iron with 4 spokes, the handle's edges are rounded by wear, and the centre bears the imprint of a hand repeatedly gripping it. Rolling the handle between your fingers, you feel the subtle irregularities where the casting left tiny pits, and you notice the way the metal warms almost imperceptibly under your skin's warmth. Moving slowly around the chamber, you come to a low, narrow door set into the wall, a cupboard of modest size. Its wooden slats are arranged vertically, and a simple latch holds it closed. Opening the door produces a soft creak as the hinges move, and inside you find a shallow shelf lined with felt, now slightly dusted. Resting on the shelf is a small stack of thin wooden discs, each one bearing a hole at its centre and a number faintly painted at its edge. Picking up the top disc, you see the numeral 8 in soft black paint and feel its smooth surface before replacing it and letting the door swing closed again. At the chamber's centre once more, the lantern's light folds around you in a gentle embrace. Each object you have touched, each surface you have observed, now seems connected by an almost imperceptible thread of stillness. Your breath lengthens. The space between each inhale and exhale grows. In this simple, flowing continuum of texture and form, you find that the boundary between self and chamber dissolves until only one continuous field of calm remains, carrying you ever onward toward quiet rest. And as the steady murmur of your breath merges with the chamber's hush, your attention settles on the low threshold of a hatch in the floor near the barrels. The hatch's wooden slats are fitted precisely, leaving only the thinnest of seams through which the faintest draft springs upward. Running a fingertip along one seam, you feel the smooth polish of well-worn wood and the coolness of the gap itself, as though it were a secret whisper between this room and the unseen world below. When you lift the small iron ring set into the hatch's surface, it resists momentarily before yielding with a soft metallic sigh that resonates into silence the moment your hand withdraws. Beside the hatch, a cluster of small metal pins lies scattered on the floorboards, as though dropped without concern for neatness. Each pin is slender and straight, its head a tiny disc of gleaming steel. Gathering a single pin between thumb and forefinger, You note its precise length and the way light refracts subtly off its head. Setting it down again, ever so gently, you watch as it nests among its companions, forming a loose constellation of metal that seems to pulse faintly in the lantern's glow. Your gaze then drifts upward to a series of faint grooves etched into the beam overhead, each one varying slightly in depth and width. These grooves run parallel to the beam's grain, as though serving to guide a tool along a measured line. If you extend your hand and trace them with your fingertip, you feel the minute ridges carved by long past hands, their edges softened by years of dust and touch. In that moment, you sense the patient repetition of each cut, the same motion over and over, until the beam bore the memory of countless guiding strokes. On the wall near this beam, a small bracket of wrought iron supports a coil of flat leather thong. The thong is braided into a tight circle, its surface darkened by age and handling. If you lift the coil from its bracket, you feel the supple give of leather beneath your fingers and catch a faint scent of tannin and thyme. When you release it, it swings in a gentle arc before settling back exactly where it began, as though drawn by an invisible magnet to its rightful place. Across the chamber, where the bench and ladder once drew your focus, a low spool of cotton twine now rests atop a narrow shelf. The twine's fibers are soft and pliable, wound into a compact cylinder whose outer layer is lightly dusted by the room's pervasive motes. Pressing your thumb gently into the spool's side, the twine compresses and then recovers its shape, as though granting a brief invitation to compress time itself, to pause within this moment and linger. Rolling the spool slowly along the shelf's edge, you hear the hushed friction of fibre on wood, a barely audible counterpoint to the room's overarching stillness. Nearby, a small assemblage of wooden pegs and wedges stands in a neat pile upon the floor. The wedges taper in graduated widths, each one cut to fit a different size gap between boards. If you lift one wedge, you feel the crisp edge and the subtle curvature of its taper, the wood grain aligned exactly with its form. Placing it back among its fellows, you watch how the pile shifts imperceptibly, accommodating the new arrangement before settling once more into restful order. Beneath this arrangement lies a faded patch of rug, no larger than a hand's breadth, whose edges curl gently beneath the adjacent floorboards. Its fibres are worn smooth, and the pattern, once an intricate lattice of muted burgundy and ivory, has softened into an indistinct haze of colour. Stepping onto the patch, you feel a slight give through the rug into the boards beneath, as if the rug itself were breathing in time with you. When you withdraw your foot, the rug settles flat again, its fibres falling into place as though nothing had disturbed them. Turning toward the opposite wall, you notice a small niche carved into the plaster, an alcove just large enough to hold a solitary object. Within it rests a tiny ceramic dish, its surface patterned by a ring of fine cracks almost too subtle to see. Touching the dish's rim, you feel the faint texture of crazing in the glaze, each crack an echo of fires stoked long ago. Lifting the dish from its niche, you sense its light weight and the smooth coolness of its underside, then return it to its hollow with a soft tap that sends a single mote swirling upward before they drift back into place. Above this alcove, a narrow board spans between two studs, its edges beveled to a gentle profile. Upon that board lies a folded sheet of blank parchment, its edges perfectly square, and its surface free of blemish. Running your finger across the parchment, you feel the crisp grain of laid paper, the subtle ridges left by the mold's wires, and you sense in that surface the promise of stories unwritten, or of silence preserved. Refolding the parchment, along its original crease, you allow the sheet to resume its compact form, its blankness an invitation to rest in emptiness. Finally, returning once more to the center of the room, you find the lantern's beam reaching between objects with equal devotion, illuminating each with a steady, patient hand. In that light, every metal ring, every wooden grain, every fiber and fragment exists not as separate element, but as part of a single careful composition. And in this silent, seamless tapestry, you stand quietly, your breath the only movement, your mind carried onward by the unbroken flow of stillness, toward a rest deeper than thought itself. And as your stillness deepens, your gaze drifts to the section of wall beside the low hatch where a single wooden cleat is affixed at ankle height. The cleat is a simple block of wood, its top edge slightly rounded by countless brushes of fabric or clothing. Running a finger along its curved surface, you feel the smoothness born of touch and time, and you imagine it once serving as a brace, a silent helper for a momentary pause in labor, an unspoken invitation to rest one's foot. Directly below, the floorboards bear a faint line of inlaid wood, strips of darker timber set into narrow grooves. The inlay forms a straight path, a guide for alignment or a decorative accent. If you press your palm along the line, you perceive the subtle contrast between the mahogany-like inlay and the paler oak around it, each grain telling a distinct story of tree and season. Just to the right, where the inlay ends, a small cluster of chalk lines marks the floor. 3 parallel strokes and a curved arc. The chalk is pale and dusty, yet it stands out against the wood in a pattern that suggests measurement or planning. Gently brushing away one line with your fingertip, you feel the chalk give way to bare wood, then watch as the particles drift upward before falling back to rest beside the remaining strokes. Turning upward, you notice a tiny metal ventilator set into the upper wall, a circular disc perforated by dozens of pinprick holes. The ventilator's surface is aged brass, dulled by air and dust, but when you incline it toward the lantern, you catch a warm glint among the pinholes. Placing your ear close, you hear nothing but the chamber's own slow breath. Yet you sense that beyond the disc lies a world of calmer air waiting to slip through. Below the ventilator, a slender wooden dowel extends horizontally, acting as a peg for hanging. From it dangles a delicate drawstring bag of faded linen, the fabric mottled and thin, the drawstring itself a twisted cord of cotton. Gently tugging the cord causes the bag's opening to widen, revealing only soft emptiness within. Letting the string slacken, the bag resumes its shape, suspended in stillness. Nearby, a low barrel lies on its side, bereft of any staves, but held together by metal hoops that bear the faint blue-black patina of old iron. One of the hoops is slightly bent, creating a tiny gap at its seam. Pressing a fingertip into that gap, you feel the cool metal edges and the rounded contour of the barrel's wood beneath. You could slide your finger entirely around the circumference, meeting the broken hoop twice before deciding to move on.